All right. I think giving folks enough time to get in here, we want to get started and be mindful of everyone else. So happy Thursday, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of CRISPR Office Hours. Thank you for joining us today. Hope everyone had a good July 4th, the last weekend, and safely did what they wanted to do to have some fun. So as many of you know that have been joining us on a regular basis, we've been having CRISPR Office Hours for the past about 3 months with various guests who are talking to all the attendees about how they're navigating this pandemic and what are the challenges they're facing and how their research has changed and evolved. Our goal with CRISPR Office Hours was, and still is, to make sure there's a space for people to talk, interact, ask questions, and get through these challenging times together. So in continuing with that tradition, we wanted to have a returning guest here who will speak to more and talk about what the findings they have. So housekeeping items, I want to make sure I remind everyone, please mute yourself and use the chat to ask questions. Our goal is to make it as interactive as possible. And also that the recording will be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Synthego, along with previous CRISPR Office Hours also as well. So with that, my name is Aditya Vempati. I'm the VP of Marketing at Synthego, and we're really excited to talk to our guests today. And as always, my co-host, Kevin Holden, who makes my job a lot easier, is going to be with us.
Hey, Aditya, and welcome everyone to another exciting episode of CRISPR Office Hours. I'm your co-host, Kevin Holden, Head of Science at Synthego, and the title for our episode this week is Navigating the Scientific Rapids, Uncertainty is the New Normal. All right, so for those of you who have been following along, our mantra over the past few months has been to keep calm and carry on. And our version of it here at Synthego is to keep calm and CRISPR on. So please stick around until the end of today's episode where you can learn how to get a special edition Keep Calm and CRISPR On t-shirt. And a special news flash for today, lead t-shirt designer and producer Bobby tells me that the t-shirts have finally arrived into the warehouse. And after all of the COVID-related delays, they'll be shipping out to our friends and viewers sometime soon.
So without further ado, I want to introduce Hamid Ghanadan. And we're really excited about Hamid because this is his second time back on CRISPR Office Hours. And he was our very first guest. He was willing to participate and be the first person to go through this and go through all the questions and whatnot that the audience would give. And we're really excited to have him back. A little bit of Hamid. Hamid is the founder of and CEO of the Linus Group, a health insights and life science strategy company. When the COVID-19 pandemic first hit, Hamid and the Linus Group actually conducted a survey. And they did a survey across 2,000 members of the life science community and developed a model of how researchers and scientists were thinking. And we actually have been using that model in CRISPR Office Hours since the very first one. And Kevin often refers to it and asks our various guests who've been on the show what they think about the model. And it's been really informative and helpful to the community. And he's back with us today to go through what his group has learned in the last 3 months and the updates they made to the model based on what they've seen, as well as feedback from various folks in the life science industry. With that, welcome, Hamid.
Thank you. It's really nice to be with you guys again, and it's really fun. I'm just loving what you're doing with CRISPR Office Hours, so thanks for having me back.
Of course. I'm sure me and Kevin are very excited to have you back. And as always, Hamid, as you've been following along, we like to do a little poll question here. Mm-hmm. And every week, the trio of me, Kevin, and our producer, Bobby, get together and go through what kind of poll question we want to make. And this week, our poll question is, what kind of Zoomer are you? And we don't mean, referring to the Zoomer generation or anything of that sort, just Zoom and how to use Zoom. So if everyone wants to take a moment to use the chat window to put their option into what kind of Zoomer are you? Our first one, are you the one that just paces around the apartment and takes their calls? Or are you the one that's always looking at yourself while the video is going on? I think you can definitely tell when someone just looks at themselves. And then the one who never has their video on. Or the one, my personal favorite, who's always muted and talking. This one always gets the meeting cracking up. And then this one is the most frustrating one for me and Kevin, I can say. The one who has their annoying Slack notifications going off every 10 seconds during the meeting. This definitely gets us rattled up. And sometimes I've been guilty of this. I don't know if others have been also. The one who's in their PJs taking the Zoom call. And also the last one, the one who's watching Friends in the background. And if you don't want any of this, I'm not a Zoomer and I prefer Cisco WebEx. We respect that. We want to make sure that option was there. So if folks want to get in on the chat and select their options, we can go from there. So Hamid, what kind of Zoomer are you?
Yeah, I'm the one who actually is looking at themselves. So I wasn't paying attention to what you said at all. Still looking at myself right now.
Kevin.
I actually prefer to have my own video off. Like, I don't like to see myself because it's just so distracting. And I have to say, you know, with Zoom being part of the new normal, it's so tiring being on Zoom, you know, whatever, 8 hours a day. But yeah, one of the tricks is to turn your own video off. It just relaxes the brain a lot more. So yeah,
that's actually true. Zoom fatigue is real.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin, which one is yours?
I'm just kidding. I was muted on purpose. I'm definitely not the one who's muted while talking, and for sure, I'm definitely not the one leaving the Slack notifications on every 10 seconds. So probably I'm number 7, the one watching Friends in the background, but it hasn't been Friends the last couple of weeks. I'm a huge Premier League football fan, so it's been watching Liverpool games, and sometimes I'll be in a meeting and someone scores a goal and I'm like, yeah. And then people are just like, what's going on? So that's probably me.
I think I'm definitely got to be the one that is looking at themselves. I'm very guilty of that. I've started to turn my video off to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
A little narcissism, what can I say?
Well, should we do the CRISPR Office Hours or have a therapy session? What do you guys think?
No, okay. Aren't they the same thing?
I thought that's what we made as a community.
Yeah, exactly. Just to help it get you along.
I'm seeing a lot of number 3 in here. Don't like to turn their video on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely saw that. Unique one is from Molly Allen, the one at work without a webcam or mic. That's what she said.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, definitely number 3. A few number 1s at the end, but it's actually probably the most 3 is definitely it. You're right, Kevin.
We've got there's a couple of number 5s on here, and I'm just going to ask everyone, please mute your notifications.
So, all right, let's kick it off here.
All right, so our previous viewers are going to remember that we've been following along with the Linus Model of how scientific research and development has evolved during COVID-19, from the initial shock to the new normal we're all facing today. So again, we're really excited today, once again, to talk to the group behind the model and the man behind the model, Hamid here, and get his take on what's happened, what's changed, and where we go from here as we face the curve flattening and then maybe growing again. So let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Hey, thank you again for bringing us on, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to share the updates of what we've been learning. Before we go to the next slide and talk about what's going on, just a little bit of background, as Aditya said, about 24 hours after the WHO declared the coronavirus to be a pandemic, my team and I started taking data on what's happening in the life sciences, you know, with the community. How are scientists going to feel about this? And we've had several waves of data taking. We have over 2,500 responses, and our next wave is actually going to be in August, in anticipation of the brouhaha all around what's going to happen with the academic institutions. But before that, I just wanted to share that where we are and where we're going.
Great. Actually, Hamid, maybe before you go into the model, can you tell us a little bit just about Linus?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are, what we say that we like to do is we like to help leaders make transformative decisions. And these are leaders in life sciences, health and wellness companies or organizations. And so that was really actually the driver behind us doing this, is because there was so much panic and there was so much confusion within our world and within our clients and our friends, that we just thought, hey, if our mission is to help people make decisions, this is something that we have to do because it's right. And so we work with companies, that provide tools and services to scientists. We work with companies that have scientifically or health derived products or services to the market. We work in a variety of health and wellness categories. And so we've been really steeped into sort of understanding the connection and the melding between what a scientist is doing at the bench all the way down to, a beverage that somebody chooses to enjoy. As long as it's all around, as long as there's a health component to it, is where we come in and we play. So we've developed all kinds of models. We're modelers just by nature, all of us. And so, we take data like the one I'm about to share with you, and then we look at it and we ask ourselves the question, what are the key variables, and then that tells us, okay, what might happen? And then that gives us the ability to zoom in on what's important and keeping our eyes to the ground. So.
Cool. So yeah, maybe if you can reorient us to the original model that you proposed back when the shelter in place started, like you mentioned, and maybe also what data you used to generate it.
Sure, absolutely. So on the 19th of March, we published this model. And so this model was based on 5 days of data taking. And it was right as the shelter in place was kicking in. It was, the WHO declared a pandemic on the 11th of March. And then on the 13th of March is when we started taking data in the morning from the science community. And so we actually have a large database of scientists who have agreed to, respond to our surveys for a variety of reasons. And so we reached out to the community that way primarily and asked them, how are you feeling? What's going on? And so, through creating the right kinds, or through creating a series of questions about how they were feeling and what they saw as the future, is when we noticed that there was going to be 4 discrete, at the time we noticed that there was going to be 4 discrete phases to how this transition was going to play out. We didn't know exactly the timing, and we didn't know exactly how much productivity was going to be affected, but we knew that the curve was going to take a shape like what you're seeing on the screen today, which is, there was going to be an initial shock, which is when this initial data was taken, and that was going to just really create all kinds of havoc in productivity, because normal was gone. But then there was going to be this quasi-normal period of which we call the Golden Interim, and the reason why we called it golden, Kevin, is because it actually allowed scientists to still be productive, but in new ways. And it was going to open up opportunities with scientists having time to think, to analyze, to really delve into the research, and do some planning and really think about the future. And so this Golden Interim, we believe, was going to be sometime, or in around 3 to 6 months before things were going to start to open up again. And then once the re-entry into the lab was going to happen, there was going to be a surge in activity, which we call the transition period. This is where we believe that the scientists were going to really be in sort of do mode rather than decision-making mode, because all the decisions that they will have made during the Golden Interim, they're ready and eager to implement them, and also just really getting their research running, ramped back up to try to catch up or try to make up for lost productivity. And we had a scientist, for example, say, for every month that my lab is shut down, it's going to take me 2 to 3 months to ramp back up. And so there's going to be this surge of activity. And then as things were going to go back into the new normal, we believed that there was going to be a net positive productivity happening because of the changes that will have been made during the Golden Interim. Like, for example, several people have told us that they're looking at implementing remote control technologies or automation or digitizing their research. And that's actually going to turn into a net positive in the long term. So that was the original model. Little did we know what was going to happen. So since then, we've been taking data along the way. And in the next slide, you'll see one of the things that our friends at Bioinformatics have been doing. So this is a market research firm that's been focusing on this space, and their president is a close friend and a trusted colleague of mine. They have been tracking lab closures week by week since this whole thing happened. And so you see what you see here right now on screen is that on average in wave 10 of their study, which was during the week of June 5th through June 11th, 24% of all labs were shut down. The areas that you see that are lit up on the map is areas where the numbers are the greatest. So you see the UK, Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina are really mostly shut down still. But on average, it's 24%. And actually, I've been looking at this week by week, and I've seen the numbers come down week by week. If you go to the next slide, for example, you'll see that this is wave 11, the following week, 21%. And in fact, I don't have a slide on this, but this past week is 18%. So labs are starting to open up. There's a lot of question around progress, though. And so the next slide will show you our data on how people have been feeling about their progress. So let me contextualize this. We asked the question of, what's happening with respect to, with the disruption that you're feeling, how much is your scientific progress going to be hindered? And so anything that's in sort of red to yellow is somewhat less to severely less. And then, the gray and the green is, the gray is no change, and the green is actually people making somewhat more progress or much more progress. And so you see that at the height, the week of April 5th was really the height of the just very, much less progress happening as people were coming out of this idea of the initial shock and then going into that interim time and moving forward from there. So you see that the much less progress is down from a height of 70% to now, at May 25th, when we took the last data point, was around 45 or so percent. Only 26% of scientists in an industry are experiencing severe interruptions. So there is, and we have seen in our data, a big difference between disruption or productivity in industry versus academia. So
why do you think that is?
So two reasons. One, I think a lot of industry have been able to stay open because they're an essential business. So they're working on something having to do with either testing or provision of care. And so they've been able to stay open, and they've implemented different rules in order to stay safe while they're open. And so that second part of it is where in academia, industry tends to be a top-down modality where many times, there are decisions that are made by management or operations that say, okay, we're going to do it this way now. And they implement those changes, whether they're a large or small company, and everyone follows. Whereas academia has been a lot more of a, independent labs. And so there's not necessarily that precedent of sort of top down telling people what to do. And so I think that's part of it as well, is that it's just safer to stay home. And so that's what's been happening. Gotcha.
So as we're looking at this data, one of the factors for us, Hamid, at Synthego, that we really had to shift course correct, has rapidly been impacted, is the ability to go to scientific conferences and events. And for us at Synthego, we've had to completely switch to a virtual events model to keep in contact with our customers and potential prospects and just educating the industry. And this is a big shift that we've had to make. So I want to get your thoughts on how do you think this has affected the industry as a whole and the community in looking at now physical conferences not being an option for a little bit. How do you think the community has adapted?
Yeah, so actually I have some data on this, and if you go to the next slide, we can talk about this. One of the areas that we have been asking about in the last tranche of our data taking was what people have been doing and what this golden interim time has been affording people. And so, when the shelter-in-place rules came in, conferences did one of three things. One, they virtualized. Two, they postponed. Or three, they basically just canceled. And I don't know what postpone really means. When are you postponing to? What are you thinking is going to happen, in the future? Because a lot of this, especially the large conferences, they book their venue 5 years in advance, because that's how long the large convention centers really require. And so it's not like you can just postpone for 3 months and think that you're going to go back. The virtual part of it, we were actually keenly interested in that, to find out whether scientists are actually engaging in these virtual modalities and to what extent they're enjoying that or not. And 64% overall said that they've engaged in some sort of an industry event that's been virtual. 78% of those are in administrative roles, and 62% are in R&D roles. But we also asked them questions, and I don't know if I have slides on this. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, no. So we asked them about when they would, potentially feel safe going to an in-person conference. What are the time frames? And you can see here, the yellow bar is unlikely during these periods of time, and the blue bar is likely. And you see that the most likely time that the majority of our respondents feel safe going to an in-person conference is a year from now. And it makes total sense because, especially with the recent resurgence of the virus and the resurgence of the cases, as well as just waiting out the next flu season to see what's going to happen, is really when people are thinking about this. But going back to the virtual conferences, we asked people what they liked and what they didn't like about the conferences. And so what I can say is that what people liked about virtual conferences is the ability to go back and review the information that was done, that the recording is available, that they can really dive deeper into a particular topic, that it's much more convenient for them. There's no travel that's involved, and so they can engage with people. But there are things that are, that leaves things to be desired. For example, when you think about any kind of a meeting, and we've actually done this with a few of our clients by innovating around how they conduct meetings. If you think about a meeting, it's not just you go there, you just get drenched with information and you walk away, which is what a lot of virtual conferences have been reduced to, is just one-way communication of content. There are multiple benefits that you get from engaging in a conference. And so the smarter way to go, and a lot of conferences are starting to do this, is they're starting to create these and understand what these benefits are in their own lanes, and then doing innovation around each of these lanes in order to be able to deliver the full conference experience, but on a virtual front. And so one thing that you can break when you're not constrained by having to be in the same place at the same time, is you can actually reach a wider variety and have a much more interesting dialogue happening, because you can have attendees from all over the world. And the second one is you're not bound by the 3 or 4 days, and so it can make conversations last a lot longer and be a lot more interesting.
Yeah, Hamid, one of the things you mentioned was like how these virtual events are so different to being at a conference in person. And I think just pointing to your, when people might feel safe going back to a conference, how many of us have, and you can answer in chat, how many of us have actually gotten sick being at a conference before? Me. So I know that happens definitely. But one of the things, that's really key and critical, at least for myself when I go to conferences, is the ability to network and to meet new people or to catch up with people. And definitely, if we're all doing this in Zoom, this is really difficult. So, the question becomes, how do we actually try to engage people like this? And then, what do you feel conference companies are trying to do to make it engaging?
Yeah, it's to be quite honest and frank, I think a lot of conferences are just trying to figure that out right now. But I can tell you that a couple of things that we've seen, a couple of movements that we've seen, and also just one area in with a client of ours for their user group meeting, for example, which is a really big part of some of the company's ways that they connect with their cohort is user group meetings. And so essentially what one group did was they decided that the 3 main benefits that they provide is content, so the delivery of content like talks and things like that, discussions, and networking. And networking is really socializing. And so they broke their meeting into these 3 different lanes. And what they did was they essentially preceded the discussion lane online with their attendees or with their cohort well before the conference itself. And so they created online areas like chats or Slack, and they actually have discussion moderators happening leading up to the event. And so then when the event happens, then there's also that event is moderated. So I'm sure you've all seen TED Talks. But if you've actually gone to a TED conference, it's 3 days long, but you don't get bombarded with TED Talk after TED Talk. There's a lot of sort of relief in between. And there's a lot of moderation and a lot of coordination. There's music being played. There's all these different activities being played. There's breakout rooms and special dialogue that happens. And I went to TEDMed 2018, and it was eerie because some of the conversations that happened there were things like infectious disease and how it travels through buildings. There's an MIT professor who talked about that, and she talked about aerosols and how they move, and she's basically mapped how they move through HVAC systems. So pretty eerie, right? This was in 2018. And then there's a researcher also who I may misquote this, but I think he was at Duke, who talked about the rate of speed of how infections travel, like how fast do they travel? And his modality for study was actually bats. So like again, very eerie. He was looking at rabies though, to be fair, but still it was something, and he actually mapped it. He said rabies travels at 21 miles an hour or something like that. It was actually quite interesting because he was able to tag these bats as they were moving around in the Andes. But anyway, just, those ideas of just breaking down those lanes. And then the third part is just networking and just, enjoying yourself and being with colleagues. And so what this one group did was they broke down micro communities and for people to do activities. Just, if there's 5 or 6 of you that are in the same place, maybe you'd feel comfortable going on a golf outing or something like that. But then the other thing that they did was they sent beer to all the attendees, and then they did a virtual beer tasting. So during one of the areas, everyone got out their beer, like it was, 4:30 p.m. or something like that. And they brought their own favorite thing. And, in small groups, you can actually do that. And it's actually really lovely. But the key is to have someone who's professionally moderating it, not just like, okay, well, now I'm going to hand you the Zoom and you're going to bombard everybody, so. Much like the two of you are doing, you moderate these conversations, and that makes a very big difference.
Everything in moderation, right?
And we've definitely had a few moderated drinking Zoom sessions during the pandemic. That's really great. I think maybe the other thing too is like trying to understand like a conference companies now having to like try to catch up to the technology, right? Because they haven't really been used to using this technology ever. Yeah. And maybe the mentality that they have from before. How do you think that's going to change?
So I actually think there's a great opportunity right now for communications to leapfrog and to innovate. So there is a technology that's just sort of out of the box you can employ, and you can take a look at what it can do, like Zoom. Like there's all these different capabilities that Zoom can provide, and you can decide to turn them on or off. But really, it's not just what Zoom can do, and pardon the war analogy here, but generals like army generals are sort of infamously known for preparing for the last war, and same thing happens here with technology. Is that people first, they're like, okay, well, we have to virtualize this. Let's take the content from the old channel and shove it through the new channel. And that's an utter failure. Like that's not really what these new technologies truly enable people to do. And so I think there's a great opportunity here to innovate, and there needs to actually be this reconnection. So researchers, and for those of you who are listening, there's an opportunity for you to actually even reinvent what your talk is going to be, and leverage the fact that we're in this particular in this particular modality. What might you be able to do with the talks that you're giving that you would not be able to do if you're standing in front of a podium and clicking through slides? And so that's there's an opportunity for just scientific communication to leapfrog and do some innovation there.
So I guess the other thing is, despite our inability now to do networking in the same way, at least right now, um, despite that, there has been, word of 2020, unprecedented amounts of collaboration, right, going along between scientists in different parts of the scientific community in different countries, coming together to fight COVID-19. You know, lots of cold calling and reaching out. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe that's happened and maybe how that's how that's changing science, the way people
Yeah.
work together?
Absolutely. So we have data on this. I mean, there's been increased collaboration, and when we asked people like, what are some of the things that are going to change about your research, collaborations was, you know, one of the I think it was actually the top choice that people made about what the future is going to look like. And you're absolutely right, Kevin. Scientists are looking to collaborate, and they're breaking boundaries. I'll give you an example of this. We have friends at ResearchGate. And in fact, the founder of ResearchGate, I was talking to him, Ehad, and he said that when they looked at this, in fact, it was the 19th of March, right after our webinar, where they looked into their database and they asked themselves, who's doing research on COVID, or who's doing research on coronaviruses? And they found 400 researchers that had published, very recently on coronaviruses. And then they looked at all of their co-authors, and they invited those people into a special community that they created to share research. And they had 11,000 researchers actively engaged on solving this pandemic problem. I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? And these people have no incentive, and they're not bound by their geographic limitations. There's 11,000 people around the world sharing information with one mission and one goal in mind. And that is just beautiful. That is exactly what, like that's science's finest hour right there. And so, that's an example of how these collaborations are happening. But also, if I don't have access to wet lab, I still need access to data, because data is the currency of science. And so, you may have produced some data, and if I can share my data with you and vice versa, we may be able to find some, novel things of interest. And so it's to both of our benefits to do that. And so I think that's what's going to happen. And I don't think it's going to stop, in fact. I think that these collaborations are happening. And it's not just within academia either, right? It's industry and academia, or industry and industry, with, to use your word of the 2020, unprecedented, with unprecedented speed, and sort of putting the typical bureaucratic, contract and paperwork aside, saying this is too important, let's hurry up and do this. And then we can figure out, let's just do it on a handshake. And that's been happening as well.
Yeah, we've definitely taken part in some of those as well. And, I'll just let our viewers remind them they can check out some talks we've done on YouTube to discuss some of the collaborations we've been involved in. Hamid, what do you think, what do you think scientists can, when do you think, scientists can kind of expect to maybe go back to the lab, all of us, and maybe what the new normal is going to look like once we get there?
Yeah, the next slide actually has some data on this about when. So what we didn't ask when people are going to go back to the lab. We asked when you think people are, like, when are you going to feel normal again, right? When, and whatever normal is, and we actually have some data about what normal is going to be based on our respondents. But essentially, it was this idea of waiting out this calendar year. And I don't know if there's some sort of bias that's built in here that somehow magically December 31 is some cutoff date, which is why a lot of people chose, or more people chose, that date. But essentially, if you look, it's a bell curve with a little bit more leaning toward the latter, the latter, the better. This thing is here to stay, from what it seems like. And we think that, the most recent conversations around sort of academia and what's been happening. We've been talking to academic administrators from several schools for months now, and really looking at how they were looking at scenarios for the fall semester, and wanting to make sure that their international students are safe and all their students are safe, and instruction is done with the utmost integrity, and making sure that they're providing, making provisions for people who either want to stay virtual or want to be on campus or need to be, in one of those cases. It's a complex problem, and so I think that feeling normal, having one full semester under people's belt is when things are going to feel normal, because then they'll have a template for how they've done it at least one time before. And so if this thing drags on, then, for example, spring semester is going to feel like normal because it's a do-over. And so I think that's why you're seeing this kind of data. But I really wouldn't expect the turbulence to stop at least until fall semester is under people's belts, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I think also maybe I was just going to say, sorry, you'd mentioned just briefly earlier about conferences delaying. I had a couple of notifications about that. Oh, we're moving our conference to October, and I don't know what that means either. Except I guess it gives me hope that like it's things are going to be more normal like they were before. Yeah. Maybe talk to us about what the new normal is going to look like.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So I agree with you. Just as far as giving you even an anecdote, I was slated to submit an abstract for a conference in October, and in fact, it wasn't so much that I would be disappointed if it went virtual, is I would have freaked out if it hadn't gone virtual. You see what I mean? Because now here's October, I'm supposed to be on stage. I don't want to go to Las Vegas. I don't want to be in a room with 8,000 people. It's just, the idea just grossed me out. And so I refrained from even submitting an abstract because I didn't know, because the conference hadn't made the decision yet. Once they made the decision that they're going virtual, I was like, okay, I like the fact that they made that decision moving forward. So, so what is the new normal going to look like? I've got 2 slides on this. The one that's on screen right now is a hopeful one, actually. Is we asked our respondents, what changes are you going to initiate, right? So there's two threads in our last survey. How are things going to change on your behalf? Like, how's your environment going to change? And then what changes are you going to initiate? And like I mentioned, new collaborations, methods, or practices was 40, like 1 out of every 2 scientists said this, right? So the science community has not been sitting idle during this golden interim. And in fact, this golden interim is truly golden because it's been given this opportunity for people to be expansive and to think and to make new connections. So that's exciting. But then you're also seeing, almost 40% saying trying new techniques, more technologies that can be operated remotely, more digitization of information and data, and then new research focus area or topic. When we dove into that last one, it's not like everyone's running to become a COVID researcher, right? They're still, the vast majority of them are staying within their overall field. So, a neuroscientist isn't going to all of a sudden become an immunologist, so to speak. But they are asking, they're focusing on new ways of doing things. And, from a perspective of change, what we see typically is that moments like this, where there's some shock to the system, what ends up happening as a long-term result is an industrialization of whatever that system was that got the shock. And so what you can expect, for example, is consolidation, is massive scaling and industrialization on how, whatever things have been done is going to move to that level. So there's 2 things that happens when you industrialize and when you have consolidation. There is this sort of perinormal or this additional layer of business or services that result out of that, right? So for example, you could actually even apply this to academic institutions, where academic institutions may consolidate because they need to innovate, right? They can't just keep doing everything the way they've been doing. The money's not going to be there. And so there may be consolidation around whoever's innovating on how to teach and how to do research. And then there's going to be satellite campuses all around. And so there's these satellite campuses maybe providing different things. So that's an example of this. And so, but yeah, absolutely, massively scaling things or massively paralleling things, the ability to do that is going to become one of the normals based on what we're seeing. On the next slide, I can show you how we've changed the model.
Yeah, so as we jump into that, just want to touch quick.
Go for it.
So we wanted to just see how researchers felt they were going to go back into lab and things they were going to address. And the area you hit really that resonates in our report too is the new research area of focus or topic and trying new techniques. We saw almost 70% of people saying, hey, we want to try new technologies. And the bow on all of this, the data that you had also, we saw almost 70% of people saying we want to go to conferences and virtual events online to make sure we network, hitting back on the question you guys had. So as we look at the next slide, right, you're going to answer this, but how does this all feed into this new model, right? I mean, you clearly have something here and what went into it and you guys have modified it. Would love to hear more about how this changed as you had more data now.
Yeah, absolutely. So this model was published on the 2nd of June after the latest data that we provided. So as you can see, we added one more, that we actually added another, a discrete phase to this whole thing, which we're calling the rapids. And if any of you have ever done any whitewater kayaking or any whitewater rafting, the feeling of the rapids is just going to be inherent to, you know what I'm talking about, is this idea that the force, like there's going to be a force that's pushing you downriver. And there's a lot of turbulence everywhere. It feels like bombs are going off, and you just have no idea what's happening. And all you can do is navigate the most dangerous parts to be able to get through the rapids safely, right? You can't really go upstream. The force of the water is too awesome, but there's a lot of turbulence all around you. And that's what we're in right now, is what a lot of the trepidation that our respondents signal to us is that these areas of turbulence are around lack of direction and not knowing. And, like a lot of scientists are starting to make plans of going back to the lab and opening back the labs. But all of a sudden they're faced with this idea of this spike that's happening in coronavirus cases. And so they don't necessarily want to spool up their colonies. Many of them, unfortunately, have to euthanize their colonies. So they don't want to spool it back up until they have some sort of reassurance that they can actually feed them and continue taking longitudinal data on them. And so that's what we mean by the rapids, just this up and down and these confusion. And it's not just a one-time thing either. As the transition happens, as you can see, there's going to be squiggly lines, because what our scientists told us is that, quite honestly, the new normal is going to be just this constant and rapid readapting to the reality, just adapting and readapting to the reality. And so while we still believe that there's going to be a spike in activity during the transition, it's not going to be smooth. It's actually going to be just, figuring it out as it goes. And things like processes, things like hygiene, things like who's allowed in the lab and who's not, when are you allowed in the lab and when you're not, all of those are small decisions that have big repercussions, and somebody's got to make them. And so that's why we're believing that things are going to happen, that, it's unfortunately not going to be just sort of just smoothly sailing into the lab, imagining that things are going to be exactly the way that they were before.
Yeah, and there's an entire curve to all of this, right? The learning curve as you're updating your model and hearing from people psychologically, what they think, and it's definitely reflected. So the other thing I want to ask is, do you anticipate more shutdowns happening, and how do you think that'll delay this model?
Yeah. We asked that, it's interesting, is whenever you think about a second wave or another shutdown or things getting worse, I feel like society collectively crawls under the desk and goes into fetal position and starts rocking back and forth. No one wants that. No one wants that as a reality, right? It's because I think that there's a collective fatigue from what's been happening, that the idea that it may happen again or get worse is just so demotivating to people. And so what we're hearing is, we have to learn how to do things safely. We have to learn how to get around this now. And I think actually that's where there's an opening for true innovation to happen. So where science is done, just like where a conference happens, is up for grabs. And you know, there are going to be ways to innovate. There's a company that actually rolled out Safer at Work as a product or an offering where they're providing hygiene products and new tools and techniques for labs to be able to do this. I spoke to a client of mine who runs a lab in St. Helena, California. They never shut down because they were part of the food supply chain and food safety chain, and so they couldn't. Otherwise, we wouldn't get our food in grocery stores. And so what they had done is very, very quickly implemented safety rules and just utterly changed the way that they were doing work in order to make sure that they themselves are safe, that their colleagues are safe, but also that the work is getting done and moving forward. And you're going to see more of that happening, I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so if anybody has any questions, there's my email address. My colleague, Kristen Apple, who was really instrumental in this as well, in both designing, taking data, and helping develop the model, is also somebody who can be reached.
So we have a few questions from the audience I want to get to here and allow you, Hamid, and Kevin. The first one is, are rapid communication vehicles for publications doing a bad thing by publishing work that hasn't been adequately reviewed, or a good thing by making it possible for people, more women, more people from LMICs, to publish rapidly during COVID-19? From Marie, the Intellectual Ventures.
Yeah, so interestingly, I mean, I think this idea of pre-publication is going to have a backlash. You know, I don't think that this idea of just having pre-publication become the norm is really going to be something that scientists are going to want or endure in the long term. However, it also sheds a spotlight that the peer review process is long overdue for some innovation. And so what I think, and maybe this is just hopeful talk, but I think that what's going to happen is that you're going to have this, you know, the scientific community coming back and finding pre-publications to not be worthy because there's a, you know, even it's going to exacerbate the reproducibility problem. It's going to, you know, be even more difficult to rely on scientific publication. And they're going to force a change in the peer review process. Another area of change that you want to look at is in times of crisis or in some sort of a shock to the system like this, you want to look at fringe activities, because fringe activities become norm, you know? And so like telemedicine being an example, it was a fringe activity before this. Now it's grown like 5,000–6,000%. And so there was this fringe talk around wanting to change peer review, and that's going to become norm. You know, I think that's what's going to happen here. So that's the way I see it, or the way, you know, when we're talking to scientists. Curious what you guys think about this too.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, Hamid. I tend to agree with you. I was just thinking also about the low to middle income countries. You know, if you think about it, like, there also needs to be a change in how publishing of data and science is done throughout the world, and access to it, and who has access to it, and how fair that is. You know, if we think about, you know, other publishers, like companies that publish music, for example, they've all adapted their models in the last like 10 to 20 years about how they distribute, you know, their products basically. And, you know, giving people access the world over to the science and not making it cost prohibitive, you know, maybe that's a really good thing that's going to come out of this. You know, as we've seen a lot of journals now, essentially giving away the COVID-19 papers for free that are coming out in the spirit of collaboration, we would like to think. So, you know, I think that's something that really may change out of this. That's really important.
Yeah. I want to just shout out a comment that Ted made, right? Ted Tisch, who we all know and love, and who was a guest on a prior episode of your show. He says that pre-publications have an advantage in a pandemic, as you can get open source protocols available to the scientific community. It's a good thing when taken in the right context. And I think, thank you, Ted, for that last statement, because I think that's exactly what it is that it's, you know, is it going to be long-term? Is it just that the peer review is going to go away and people are just going to publish straight? I don't think so. But contextualizing it right now, I think it makes a lot of sense that organizations are doing this.
Great. That's a really heavy question, I think, and much for debate with the right output there that we said the context is key. This one we have from Hugo. Do you anticipate a renewed focus or investment in infectious disease research departments at academic institutions post-COVID-19?
Yeah, we asked, so we have some data on this, and Hugo, thanks for the question. We asked our respondents whether they think funding generally is going to go up or down, and then we were able to break that apart based on what they did, and the vast majority. So if you look at the entire data, it's a bell curve. So equally as many people think it's going to go up as they think it's going to decrease, with the majority of them being right in the middle of saying, we don't think it's going to change that much. When we parse the data on who these people were, generally speaking, the trend is that infectious disease or people working on vaccines, immunology, infectious disease, or virology, we're expecting a bump. Makes sense. The vast majority of the people in the middle were like cancer research and molecular biologists and genomics and, just generally speaking, looking at translational or human health related disease research, where like things aren't going to change that much. Cancer is still going to be a problem tomorrow. And we tend to agree on that. And then some of the people, this is even more of a generalization, but some of the more esoteric or basic research questions in things like evolutionary biology or developmental biology. And those are actually rapidly growing fields. But if people were potentially asking more esoteric questions, they were expecting their funding might go down. I don't know if that specifically answers the question. It's not unprecedented that an administration essentially guides the public funding toward a particular thing. I mean, it's happened before, right? So like, we're going to focus on cancer, or we're going to focus on translational. That's happened before. And yeah, I mean, there may be some sort of guidance coming from the government body saying public research fund is going to go toward this, I don't know whether that's going to happen. I just think that it's not unprecedented. It wouldn't be like weird if it happened.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So then we have our last question. Do new therapeutic research tools such as CRISPR gene editing accelerate the market arrival of vaccines compared to previous methods of vaccine exploration and generation? Nick from University of South Carolina.
I think, Kevin, that one's more for you than for me. So
yeah, maybe I can jump in on this one. It's a really great question, and it's really difficult to answer. Maybe some of you will recall, actually, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a professor from UC Davis come on and talk about a vaccine that they're developing. And so I'd encourage definitely you to go back and check that YouTube video out from a couple of weeks ago. I think in general, CRISPR is being used to better identify how immune cells that are involved in the development of vaccines, for example, can affect the outcome of that vaccine and the long-term immunity you can get. And of course, you could also perhaps use CRISPR in a way, if you think about it, to basically engineer immune cells to teach or show the immune system viral peptides, for example. So I think there are some really great ways that gene editing, for example, could be used to basically act tangentially to, I guess, traditional vaccine development. But yeah, I check out the video we put up last week, and I'll just keep your eyes open for that.
Great. So thank you, Hamid. Really appreciate you joining us. And as we're about wrapping up here, Kevin, can you let us know who's coming on for next week?
Yeah, great. So thanks, everyone. Next week, we're excited to be joined again by another fantastic guest speaker. And thank you, Hamid, for coming today. But next week, we're going to be joined by Dr. Martin Kampman, who's an associate professor at University of California, San Francisco. His lab specializes in utilizing innovative technologies like CRISPR-I, CRISPR-A to understand really the cellular molecular mechanisms of human diseases. And so now they've also started collaborating on COVID-19 research as well. So we'll learn also about a new website that Martin and his lab have launched called CRISPR Brain, which is like a data commons for functional genomic screens in differentiated human cell types. So should be really interesting, and we're looking forward to that.
Great. And so as we wrap up here, as Kevin started at the start, mentioned at the start, our executive producer, Bobby, has the shirts in. We're shipping them out. If you'd like to get one, go to synthego.com/com to get one. And also, Hamid, thank you very much for coming back and walking through the model. I think this is really fruitful in terms of the folks looking at where we think things are going from a research perspective and the psychology behind it. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's my pleasure, and always really fun to talk to both of you. So.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, thank you, Hamid, very much for joining us again and for giving us an update. Really appreciate that.
Yep. All right. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. See you next time.